A couple things tonight to cover. We wanted to hear how the small group processes are going, see what people needed support with from either me or Jared or Lane, because she's with us as well. And then Erica also wanted to share some of the data that the police departments put together for us in response to requests from earlier in the process. And then we'll just open the floor and talk about whatever we need to talk about. So Erica, did you want to go first or should we do the small groups first?
Let's do the small groups first, if you don't mind. That'd be great.
Okay. So which small group would like to talk about where they are? Who's on the hot seat?
We nominated George to kick us off.
Yeah, we can go. I'm happy to do that. We can do that for, I think we're calling ourselves Oversight and Accountability.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had a really good meeting with, we weren't able to get the whole group all together on Zoom, but we had a really good meeting. And what we've been talking about is the possible creation of a Public Safety Oversight and Reform Commission. And we talked about sort of why would such a thing be needed? And then if we created such thing, what would be its mission and what would be its objectives. And basically the reason for creation is centered on the whole notion of community-oriented policing. And central to this idea of community-oriented policing is the idea of building trust and legitimacy between the police and the community, of fostering a guardian mindset versus a warrior mindset. And importantly, sort of co-producing public safety with the community. And sort of a necessary corollary to that is that the community needs to be involved in the oversight and accountability process. So we're working on a document that would propose the creation of a commission. And I've got some notes here on what the mission would be. It would be to promote, in partnership with the SMPD, the best practices in community policing in the city for the fair treatment and safety of all. And then we've got a second task that would come in a second step, and that is to work with the PD and experts to develop, recommend, and help implement reforms for handling complaints, including intake, review, investigation, and oversight of disciplinary decisions and policies. And we talked about, and I'll come back to that second piece, we talked about some items that would be within the mission and scope, and of course that would be promoting the safety and well-being of folks in the city. It would be to continue doing the types of things that this group is doing, and that is to review policies and practices and make recommendations, to give input on the biannual budget, to promote transparency and the collection and publication of data, to evaluate ideas for reimagining public safety, and to have some role in reviewing disciplinary proceedings and final actions taken by the department for violations of policy. Now, there's a second piece we talked about that would require more time because it's a little more complicated, and that is what role should such a commission have in investigation and review of complaints. And over many decades, there's been a variety of models for how that is best done. And what we are cobbling together into that will make its way into a recommendation is this idea that after the commission would be appointed, one of its first tasks would be to spend like 90 days figuring out what it would recommend regarding a complaint intake and review and oversight and the like. So that's, I'll stop there and let the other folks who were in the subgroup tell me what I got wrong and add to that.
Are you calling the shots, Lisa, or do you?
I'll call the shots, sorry. Erica and Nat.
So I just, part of the subcommittee that was that put this together, and I just, for transparency, and also just to make people aware, I was not involved. I wasn't aware of any of the meetings prior to this. I wasn't invited to any of the planning meetings, and was not able to see any of the drafts of the proposal up until yesterday. And so while I'm really, really hopeful that the committee takes into account some of our department voices before this is actually proposed to the larger committee, I just wanted to say that, you know, we were not able to be part of that process, and it's really, really important to us that we be part of any planning that goes further. So
yeah,
thank
I think we absolutely all agree on that. And as everyone knows, we all have been scrambling to try to get whoever was available to get together on short notice. So we missed a couple of others also on our first calls.
Yeah, I wanted to reinforce what George and Erica said. We talked openly about this has to be a collegial effort to make it successful in the community and the city and the department and our group. And we want feedback and we want interaction. And I love some of the language used in the committee because it was a partnership mentality in the room. And we're sorry that you couldn't be there, but you'll hear from other members of our committee to reinforce that position that we had taken.
Angela?
Yes, just to kind of piggyback on both what Nat and what George said, we definitely want to have a collaborative effort. And I think at the same time, though, we know that a document, especially a working document that is this comprehensive and this, for lack of a better word, important, we needed to get the ball rolling, right, on starting to get all of the language in place. And so I think that's, so as we started to organically evolve and get the ball rolling, then it was like, that's when we collaborated with everyone. So, you know, we will have upcoming meetings, and then George can, when he sends like draft 3.0 or 4.0, you know, he'll circulate more to our entire group. And that way you guys have visual on it, and then can then start to, you know, add to it or recommend changes. And then we have the meeting where we can discuss it further, like as far as what changes, you know, you'd like to see and what this looks like. And like I said, it's a working document, if you will. And at the same time too, we are reviewing, because Lisa is the great researcher. So we are consistently reviewing documents and different oversight committees from around the nation. And so we're incorporating we're looking at what they do and then how that would look for us. So definitely, it's definitely a collaborative effort. And like I said, I'm sure George will circulate it, you know, to the rest of our group. And also at the same time, you know, we'll make sure everybody comes in to have these meetings.
But again, just to be very clear, I was available, but, you know, when you're talking about collaboration, I did not even receive an invitation to any of the meetings. So I understand that you all were collaborating amongst yourselves, but our department didn't actually have an opportunity to have anybody in those meetings. And even though both Darnell and I were available, and I was actually signed up for the committee. So again, understood.
Erica, I think you're overstating. I'm sorry. I just think you're overstating what happened. You know, over the course of the weekend, we started a document, and the first chance we had a meeting, and that was on Monday, which is only 2 days ago. And everybody was invited, and you were invited, and I saw the Zoom invite. So we really want your input. We're so happy that you guys are on the committee. Been in meetings with Darnell. It's terrific. We're looking forward to your help, your involvement, and your assistance. And we need the department's perspective. So no one's trying to keep you from anything. And you've got all the documents when all the other committees members got documents. So I just don't want to accept this this level of consternation about missing one meeting. So, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disagreeable.
And I think just to weigh in here for a minute, I'm going to be fairly quiet throughout the meeting because I do realize that that your recommendations are still in progress. But we do, I want to be sure Lisa facilitates for both sides, making sure that the police department is able to provide perspective on all the proposals, and that, if there are people who want to weigh in amongst the committee, we'll make sure that we're facilitating that, because as everybody has said, the goal is to have everybody in the room and participating. So we'll make sure to facilitate that, and can also provide more opportunities for the police department to weigh in, both through Erica and Darnell, who are members of the committee, but also if there are perspectives that want to be shared, we want the recommendations to be informed, as I know all of you do. And that's of interest to me too, because there may be obstacles on this one. One thing I will mention, even though I've promised not to weigh in, is the city, as part of its restructuring process, has had to look at our boards and commissions overall. So one thing I would encourage you to look at is just the amount of staff time involved with the commission, and try to be attentive to that. As you know, Lisa spends a tremendous amount of time with you. So I would just ask you to be attentive to that as well, because that's something, as Mark knows well, we're looking at sort of across the board, and we have a number of commissions, and we're trying to look at how we can most efficiently staff those. So just one thing to keep in mind as you work on your recommendations.
Madam City Manager, we literally discussed that.
Good.
And
Great.
and I even brought out the charter provisions. We talked about the Personnel Commission. What bothers me right now is, on my email inviting me to the meeting, Erica's name was on that list. And I asked for you in the meeting out loud. And so I don't understand where the mishap, because that's not where we are mentally. At least I'm not, because my background suggests that I want to hear from my fellow members of that department, and I want to hear candidly about our suggestions, because then we can talk across the table to each other and figure out what's best for this community and best for the department.
And I really appreciate that, Nat. Thank you. I went back through and I checked through my emails. And the fact of the matter is that we're wanting to be part of this process going forward. And I think it was just that disappointment of finding out that there was a meeting that, again, I was sitting around and I was available and not being able to be part of that. And then having these, this fully formed document come out of it. So thank you. I do appreciate that. You are the mayor of Santa Monica. So,
I am inundating everyone with emails. So it probably got buried under email 17 of that day, because there were a lot. But I did double check the list. So I was trying to make sure that everybody that was on the group was invited to the Zoom. So let's call it a technical glitch, and then I'll pass it over to Robbie. But know Erica and Darnell and the whole group, because we've talked about this as recently as this morning, right? We want to make sure we're hearing what the department has to say. We're setting aside time for next Monday's meeting to be just a dialogue with the police department on these recommendations. So there certainly is, absolutely, from the beginning, everybody on this committee, I think, has been clear that we want to develop recommendations that make sense. And we can't make recommendations that make sense if you guys aren't part of the conversation. That's why you guys are on the committee, and why we're going to continue to kind of workshop these things together. And now I'll give it to Robbie, who patiently has her hand up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to, I didn't want to reiterate what everybody else said, but I just wanted to say how much I appreciated George going ahead with his 2.0, then 3.0, and hopefully coming 4.0, which definitely, the other committee members who weren't present can be a part of. It just made it so much easier, because yes, Lisa, you do send us lots of emails, and it's helpful though. I really appreciate all the information that's coming forward. It just helps us to make, if you ever can, I find myself reading in between sandwich and eggs and whatever else, I'm having. So I just appreciate George going ahead and making a working visual document that we could look at and then talk about, and, welcome others to the conversation. And, I think it's just a good thing. but I definitely know it was good to get started.
I wonder if it would be helpful to have each committee designate a facilitator to kind of help honcho that particular committee, working with Lisa, of course, but just focused on that committee, say, oh, we haven't heard from this person, send an email reminder. It's impossible, Lisa, given how many things are going on, strands of work, for you to do everything. So I'm just saying that that might be something where each subcommittee wants to decide who to facilitate, and that could help fill some gaps.
I welcome the support.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, and then too, like we had mentioned earlier today, creating, like you said, those different folders where we have these working documents for all of the subgroups. And that way we can consolidate all of the suggestions for each subgroup. You know, that's the way of keeping track as well.
I was trying to do double duty and do that while I was on this call, but it wasn't working out. So I have to do it after. Yeah. But you'll have those to start going to in the morning. Because I realize there is a lot, and there's also great information, and Jared also now helping us research and pulling forward great research as well. So I want to make sure everybody has all the information they can have as we're all working super hard to develop the best recommendations that we can. Anything else from oversight and accountability?
My last comment would be that the document is a DRAFT underscored.
Yeah, we're nowhere near the finish line. So
that's important.
Everybody. I know Darnell knows because he was on the use of force group last night. And that call went on for quite some time and was a good discussion, I think, and very open. So maybe we'll move on to that group. Does anybody want to report out about some of the early steps there?
Mark, you may be the...
Sure, I'll get started. So yes, we did have a really good conversation, a very transparent and frank conversation. And there's, I think there are some phrases you're going to keep hearing from all the different groups. So I'll echo some of what we just heard from George, and that is best practices. That we're Santa Monica, we pride ourselves on not just being good, but being a leader. So the idea that on all these strands, we're looking at the best practices around the country so that we can be leading edge and best practices. And that would include, besides oversight and the other strands, obviously, use of force. I think certain themes came up in our meeting and certain kind of principles. A couple of them were de-escalation. We want to stop bad situations before they start. Use the minimal amount of appropriate force, understanding that situations can get difficult at times and that police need policies and need tools at their disposal. The other would that use of force is not in isolation. You know, there aren't that many uses of dramatic uses of force in an average year around. So it's not just those extreme situations we're talking about, but the perception of force and attitude on more routine kind of interactions that the police may have with the public as they do their work. And so that gets down to beyond de-escalation and so on to issues of culture and issues of practice and issues of training. So policies are a piece of paper, they're the starting point, but how they go through practice and culture and then accountability and oversight is really where the rubber hits the road. So we started looking at some specifics. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we got down to very granularly about use of batons, about use of tear gas. Darnell was very eloquent about how he, in his experience, has approached very specific situations in the field regarding force, and that was very, very helpful. And Daryl also was very helpful on that. But we're just getting started. And one last thing that did come up, and this is in the broad definition of use of force, not just in extreme situations, but in day-to-day, and that's the question about military equipment and vehicles, and how appropriate that is, as well as weaponry that's available. And then other questions say about curfew. Not that that's a use of force, but it's a tool of that can be used in extreme situations. That's all I have to say right now. I don't, Darnell, George, any things I forgot or anything you want to add?
I usually have something to say. I'm just trying to wait and see if Daryl will speak first.
No, go ahead.
Oh, Daryl's there. I didn't notice you in the corner. Daryl too. I didn't see you there. But
I would just wanted to underscore that you referenced it, Mark, that we had an extensive discussion about culture and about how police interact with members of the community and respect and the guardian mindset versus warrior mindset. And we recognize that a policy needs a culture and some other aspects in order to make it work. You can't just write words on a page, but you actually have to have systems and cultures and norms that people are willing to follow in order to make it work.
Daryl, Darnell.
Darnell, he was going to speak. I was waiting.
All right. No, just to kind of echo what you guys said, I think we had a really good conversation. We talked for about 2 hours. Hopefully I was able to answer some of the concerns that you guys had regarding our use of force policy. And it overlaps, you're correct. A lot of it has to do with police culture. And the reason why there's a low number of use of forces is because of the language in our policy, as well as the culture in Santa Monica. We touched on the militarized weapons, and I gave my perspective on it as far as people who make homemade ghost guns, and there are people who are armed with AR-15s. We look at the Hollywood shooting, and those guys that were armed with military-graded armor and AR-15s, and I think that it does have a place. I get everything's about optics, but at the end of the day, the police are here to protect and serve the community. And my argument was, if we have people coming into our city with AR-15s and shotguns, we need the same things to protect our city. As far as our Bearcat, the rescue vehicle, my same sentiments. I get it. A lot of people, they're put off by it because of the way it looks, but the truth is a bulletproof vehicle used for us to save our community. It's a rescue vehicle. It doesn't shoot out any projectiles or anything like that. If there's an active shooter, like there was at Santa Monica High, we want to be able to go in there with something that's going to protect us. But I think overall we had a really good conversation, and I think it really benefited as far as bridging the gap and explaining some of the things that may not be as widely open or that we don't talk about enough. So I think it was a good starting point, and I'm excited to continue to talk about those things.
I think the only other thing, I didn't hear the first part, but was the culture of approaching civilians or citizens. And I hate to use that because it's kind of like us versus them, and we want to back off that mentality. But, my concern sometimes when things are escalating or things may go to excessive force is when someone's approached and they're touched, or I think the more we can control verbal commands is better, because once you touch a person, and if their natural instinct is, everyone's instinct is survival, or push back, or if you push them against the car, they're going to push. Then you got to, because of the powers of sworn officers, then you have a situation of resisting, which is a natural behavior. It's a complex thing. How are you going to say someone's resisting if it's just a natural reflex to pull back? And then it's escalated. So to that end, I think it's a difficult subject, but like I said in a little note I sent to our members, when you're a sworn officer, you're swearing to uphold Constitution and whatnot to the citizens, so that you may need to take a little bit extra, I'd say risk, but is your duty to approach civilians with safety and civility, and not to put them in a situation where it becomes conflictual. So some of the issues with our younger people and some of the younger officers, they're provoked, and then you have a different set of situations. So excessive force starts in the mind and depends on the officer or the civilian. I think it's probably more implicit on the officer to be, since he's made for example, he's taking control of the situation because they've stopped you. So I think it's the officer's responsibility to do everything that they can to avoid it becoming any kind of force or physical contact as much as possible, because everyone feels that they have a right to be treated, and when, because of the lack of the two cultures completely understanding each other, it's always going to be a conflict. So I think we talked about a little bit at our meetings today, and I think we agreed to talk more about it to kind of shake it out to see what it's going to ultimately look like.
And I think from the, oh, go ahead, Darnell and then Nat.
Yes, yeah, just to piggyback on it, thank you. No, for sure, and I think it does go back again to our culture and the way we're trained as far as de-escalation and our arrest tactics. I'll just share with the group what we talked about, because sometimes there's the misconception we escalate things when in actuality, we're trained to kind of deflect the situation. Like, we would never tell someone, hey, you're under arrest, turn around, because we know 9 times out of 10, if someone doesn't want to be arrested at that time, the fight's on or they're going to run. So we're taught to use ways to deflect from doing that, where we're not actually being transparent and showing them, hey, we're going to arrest you right now, whether that be someone being seated and being asked to place your hands behind your back. And that limits the use of forces that we have, because we're not allowing it to get to that where someone's able to just run away or able to fight you, because then the fight's on, and now that's an unpredictable place as a police officer and also, as a civilian. So we do try to have those trainings, and we preach that. Like, that's our culture. You're never going to see an officer in Santa Monica have someone standing up in front of their face and say, turn around, now you're under arrest. That just won't happen.
Oh, and I don't know if it was mentioned, we talked about one other thing, maybe having some specifics of do's and don'ts. I know we talked about, we haven't had it, at least in recent history, maybe Nat can speak to it, but once a person is handcuffed, there should be no need to use pepper spray. And I think the culture of the department says you're going to get in trouble if you do that. And I think we're thinking maybe that's understanding, but if it's written somewhere or policies with regards to the different instruments they use, so there's a clear don'ts, and then you have some other situations where you do. So the community has an understanding of those behaviors. So I know in our department, Darnell assured us that that wasn't happening, but we've all seen it, so that maybe it makes people feel better if policy says if someone's handcuffed, you can't spray them. If they're handcuffed, you cannot hit them with a baton. Because it gets into issues of unions, and they say, well, maybe I was still fearful of my safety. So we have to flush it out if that's practical or not. So that's one of the other issues we talked about, I believe.
Yes.
And then Angela? Oh, sorry, and Darnell too.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nat. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, when in your discussions, did you discuss Lexipol's policy writing business? They're a controversial outfit, and I'm just curious if you had a discussion about it.
We did not.
They give you a policy that's in conflict with state law. And
There was a recognition that some of the existing policies have not yet been updated or published as updated.
Okay.
But we did not talk about that organization per se.
Okay. That's fine.
We did talk about an approach, Nat, to get at that issue. I'm sorry to jump in, Lisa,
no.
but we did talk about an approach to get at that issue. It's a 10-page document, and there are other policies, but the approach that we've been talking about is to come up with a set of recommendations that would then direct the city manager to work with experts and the department to have an updated policy that meets all of the recommendations. So that's a
my question was leading to the point whether there's collaboration before publication. See, in other words, my experience is if we're going to make a policy in the department, the troops get together and come up with something. And if you know an outside consultant, you don't do that, huh? That's all I want to know.
I see Erica. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So the way that Lexipol has been adopted in our department is that we don't accept Lexipol just as written. We make changes based on legal requirements for the state, based on what we determine is the standard that we want our officers in Santa Monica, and many of our policies, if you look through Lexipol, are written specifically targeting our audience. So they're specifically written to Santa Monica standards for Santa Monica police officers, and they would not be relevant to other police agencies, even in our area. So they're specifically written with that in mind. And it goes through a process, and it's not, just officers getting together and then deciding on a policy. There are experts involved. There's a lot of different drafts, and there's approvals. And one of those approvals is the sitting chairman of the POA of the union. Yeah. But it's not in an editorial capacity. It's just in a approval capacity. So does that answer your question, Nat?
It's very helpful, see, because my concerns are that we shouldn't take a global look at the world. We should look at Santa Monica. Santa Monica is a unique community, less than 100,000 population. It's not Minneapolis. It's not various other places. But we do have data that shows we have some things that we need to work on. And I appreciate Michelle's report to us, Michelle Wittig, a very competent professional. I appreciate her stuff, and that we want to look into these things. And for us, in order for us to sell the council and the community on the fact that we had an honest collaboration, we should get these things out and flushed as fast as we can. Thank you very much for your time.
Go ahead, Angela.
Okay, so I had a question to the group as well. When you guys met, did you discuss the use of rubber pellets during peaceful demonstrations? Did that come up in conversation at all, or again, use of?
Yes, we did, and we're waiting. My understanding is they were using plastic rather than rubber, and I think Darnell was going to check on that to see which munitions they were using.
We actually have a bullet we could show you as well.
Yeah, so the plastic bullet is generally more ballistic because it's more injury than the rubber bullet. But they're supposed to be non-lethal, but they can hurt you significantly. And Darnell shared with us that it was, well, I'll let him share that since he shared it, but we were concerned about, again, what is in the arsenal that will be used against civilians, i.e., not to focus on the 31st, but I shared with the group that when we hit a march on the police department back in '70, Dr. Quinn, a lot of you people may not know him, but he warned us that the Santa Monica PD was laying in wait to come and attack us with clubs. And because we didn't go all the way down there, we avoided that. So to that end, we want to look at what's going on in Santa Monica, how it's evolved, and what we can do to keep it from evolving and not slipping back. So again, just like with the baton training we asked about, we want to know about the ballistic munitions they'll use. If it's plastic, I think LAPD is using rubber. So we just want to know if we're out there and you actually get hit with that thing, it's going to hurt you a lot. So we just want to know what, as a community, how we are agreeing to be policed, in terms of our safety, since we are the department's employers as taxpayers, you want to make sure that we have the instruments or the tactical stuff that we can feel comfortable with, especially if you're expressing freedom of speech, of course, but just in general daily activity. So the thought was what munitions they're using and the instruments they do use, what is the tactical training? Because most of it's a perishable skill. So if you don't use, I know they use shooting, as a civilian I'm speaking, but Darnell can kick in. They have to shoot, so they're familiar with the gun, right? So if you're, I think they do practice some handcuffing techniques, but if you're using a baton or those kinds of instruments, and you're not really proficient in it, some officers are very good with it. Others is kind of on their side, and if you're not really good with it, then you will, if you get in trouble, you'll hit someone in the head, which is against policy. So, but if you're trained how to use these weapons, or Santa Monica has a policy of how the officer will be regularly and routinely trained, and then the community can see that. I think it'd be a lot better confidence. And I think in the question you're getting to is, what are you using? And we need to be aware of what you're using, because most of it's not top secret, because these are downgraded military weapons that were initially designed for enemies of the state. And when Leah, Matt probably knows this, eventually it became legal to have these type of weapons. So we just want to make sure that as civilians, there's a construct that we can all live with when they're in deciding when they'll be used. So Darnell, do you want to kick in that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we had a pretty long conversation just about that topic, and without getting into 531, because everyone's waiting for the after action report regarding the things that occurred at 531. I told him my personal perspective on it as a human being and as a police officer. And what I told him was, I'm a person who I've always exercised my First Amendment. When Trayvon Martin was killed, I protested in Union Square. When Mike Brown was killed, I protested. If I wasn't at work, honestly, I probably would have been at the protest. And my answer to it, without digging into 531, was, from a police officer standpoint, there was a dispersal order given. As well, and people in the committee, we spoke about it and they admitted this, they saw it on TV. There were people purposely putting bottles to the side, bricks, setting up cardboard barriers. So when you talk about while the less than lethal munition was used, people had an ample amount of time to leave. And me personally, if I was protesting and I see the bad actors, because undoubtedly there were a lot of people that were there to protest for the right reasons. And unfortunately, it got overcome by the people that were just simply bad actors. So I know a lot of people would say things like they were peacefully protesting and these munitions were shot at peaceful people. Our policy states very specifically when we can use these things, and it's for violent encounters. And also we discussed that people weren't intentionally hit. I explained that our sergeants multiple times said, skip it against the ground. So that was kind of the gist of that as far as it. And I did get the answer for you as well, as far as it's rubber or plastic, and it's actually polyurethane ogive. That's what it's made out of. So, you can Google it, and as far as doing your research on the pros and cons to using that versus plastic.
It's pretty hard, yeah, but it's still pretty hard, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and in our policy, it clearly states when we can use it and if there's actually an arm. So it also can be used for less than lethal. It's something that's used if someone's armed with a gun, and if it's feasible, and if we have the opportunity to disarm them with this, we will instead of shooting them. Which is a reason why, another reason why I don't think that it should go away, because it's also used for non-lethal incidents as well.
We didn't cover. Did we use the beanbag?
Sorry, just one thing that I'm noticing in all of the groups, right, is these groups are not fine line silo issues, right? Like in every discussion, there's the topic of the group, and then there's the things that filter up to it, right? And so I think in use of force and oversight, in the next group that's going to talk too, we certainly see that these things are overlapping, right? So where we may be starting a discussion around use of force, then it very quickly silos over to like training or policy changes or things of that nature. And I think that I just want to pull that forward because I think it's another reason why all these small groups need to be in conversation with each other, and why I'm trying to stay on the groups and make sure that everybody knows what everybody's talking about, because I really will, as we'll see in the budget allocations discussion, it's the same thing happening there, where there's the headline topic, right? But all of this stuff is nested together. And a lot of what it comes down to is like, what is our philosophy around safety, right? At a basic level, what are the key things that we really want to make sure are happening in our community? A big theme that seems to be coming out is a lot around equity, right? And so some of these discussions, the headline is really about how do we make sure that we're equitable in this area? And so that's just something that I wanted to pull forward. And I do want to go over to budget allocations because I know Erica still wants to present and talk a little bit about the data. So who from budget would like to kick it off? Go ahead, Mike.
So the budget committee met earlier today. I had previously gone through the budget and put together a proposal, as Lisa said, kind of going along those equity lines. And I just looked at how much community services were cut. It was about 21%, and the library was cut by somewhere in the 30% in those dollar amounts. And the police budget basically stayed stagnant. And essentially, what if you cut all three of those equitably? And so that ended up being like a 7.5% cut across all three of them, and that would allow you to reinstate, $4 million to community services and $3 million to the library. But that was just kind of like a base case model. What we talked about today was really three different ideas. One, that base case, simply because that would be the easiest, in that these programs within community services and the library were there last year. And so it would be easier to just reinstate those if the funds were made available for those. We also talked about really kind of reimagining and just what ideas we could come up with and work with the police to figure out what we could add. And then the other piece of it was really within the police budget, where could there be some reallocation of resources that would more meet a lot of the community needs? There's some, within that police budget, there's, I think Erica said things that go towards really, solving crimes. And then there's other parts of it that are more community based and building within the community. And so what's the ability to shift some of those resources within that budget? And so, we put together a spreadsheet essentially, which will be shared with the rest of the group. We want everybody's input, but with ideas of programs, whether it be through the community services or the library, that existed or didn't exist, that we want to see added. Now, if they didn't exist, it's going to be a little bit tougher to figure out how much those would cost. Again, it's, we're working on a tight schedule, but we just want to kind of get an idea of what it is that people want to see either reinstated or instated for the first time. Also, things that they would want, like that would be cut, like within the police budget, or areas that they think that we think that we could cut to potentially make some of those funds available. And then the last piece that we talked about was just, again, what about internally within the police budget, looking at full-time employees, if, some of these other groups, like the alternative to police showing up to incidents, if they were to, maybe make it so more mental health or homeless experts were to show up, if that's pulling responsibilities away from police members, then what are the police, doing? Is it this, that we have more police with less to do? And so how would we like to see a reallocation of those full-time employees within the police department? So that was kind of our initial different directions that we wanted to take it today. And obviously we still have a lot more work to do, but I'll turn it over to anybody else who was in the committee to see if they want to add anything.
I think we're also just thinking, and just from a pragmatic perspective, like about our recommendations and the short-term recommendations and longer-term recommendations and how those can work together to just really make a real change, and not, you know, of course, like reimagining is part of that, but I think, and I'll just speak for myself with this, just thinking about how can our recommendations right now like really make a difference and also create a vision for the future at the same time.
I saw Erica and then Nat.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to thank Mike and also Relinda just for doing a really nice job of, I think, you know, articulating that conversation today. I did think it was really productive, and I like this idea of us working together to identify things that we could refund that are really important. So thanks, Mike.
I basically like to reiterate what Erica was just saying. Historically, many of you don't realize this, we had sworn officers with their gear writing parking tickets all day. We had a traffic accident, we had motor cops standing in the middle of the intersection, the highest paid uniformed officers. And we thought, well, maybe we should have the civilians writing the parking tickets. And then we said, and we started to save more money and move things around and so on and so forth. You now have a far more sophisticated police department. But the point I'm getting at is, the way I was hoping this would come out, Michael and Relinda, is you think about in conjunction with talking to the police, what jobs do you have now that sworn officers are required to do that you think are, and I'll be sort of candid, are beneath their particular training and level of work? And you'd be surprised what input you might get from an everyday hardworking police officer. And that's where I was hoping that I'd hear this discussion go, so that you're not reaching arbitrarily in, and I'm not suggesting you're doing that, Relinda and Michael. I'm just simply saying, giving you historical piece, that makes a lot of sense to let the people who are, for example, I've suggested, Lane, that we're a tourist institution. Downtown Santa Monica has ambassadors. And we were having a discussion about, well, if we had people on the pier that were dressed in the old Canadian Mountie kind of outfit with no bullets, but dressed so that people coming to Santa Monica, oh, do you remember when we were out on the pier, this beautiful looking guy with the uniform was, or lady was telling us what to do and how to do it? You can change things around dramatically. And I'll shut up after I say this about the armored vehicle. The armored vehicle has its place in a community like Santa Monica, because I could, without going to giving you a history lesson, where it would be invaluable and save lives. Maybe it shouldn't be painted like it, I don't know what it looks like, but we shouldn't have military type paint on our police vehicles. It should be more of a way that says Santa Monica. But for the purpose of it, it's a life-saving piece of equipment. And don't get too excited about throwing it away before you know why it's there. Okay? Because I mean, I've shot all the guns that they have, shotguns and all that kind of stuff. But let me tell you what, you remember, you guys know 19th and Pico, or 20th and 21st and Pico? That belongs to the city now. It used to be a union. It used to be, oh, I can't think of the name of the place. But anyway, I got a call as a sergeant to go out.
A plastic company.
Yeah, where it's Plastic Guide, but it was some, before that it was a community place, so, like an Elks Lodge.
Right.
They had a problem, we called it a 415. I get there, and my God, an officer had gotten out of his car with a shotgun going in a place with 250 people when it shouldn't have only been 50. And rather than me worrying about the fight, you know what I did? Took him out and back to his car. Why did I do that, Erica? Tell him. Tell him, Erica, you're a police officer. Why did I do that?
I'm sorry, Nat. I completely lost the trail of that story.
Oh no, it's important. The man in a building with a shotgun is an absolute insane thing to do. That's all I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
So what these folks are trying to tell you in their meetings is sometimes there are insane things that are done by people who think they're doing the right thing. And all I'm trying to suggest to you is not changing the world, but you can do some small things to make this town a far better town if you work in conjunction with the police department. I listen to Darnell, and I'm educated by that. I have a lot of friends on the department. We talk all the time. And so my point is, let's not get hard-nosed about it, one another, either side, and let's try to work for the benefit of the city of Santa Monica, okay?
Yeah.
And I may talk too much, but that's the way I feel from an emotional and historical way. I've been at probably the highest levels you can be in law enforcement in this state. And what you guys are doing, you know what I told Lane? Lane, I said, if we get a model, I will make sure that model gets up to Post and be so that Post can brag about it all over the state of California. Post is Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission. If Santa Monica comes up with a model plan out of this work that you guys are doing, I will make sure that something happens in the state of California that gives us a big pat on the back about thinking about this intellectually and less emotion than I probably have, but and come up with a good plan where it's workable. Thank you for listening to me.
But Nat, to your first point, I just want to say we did talk a little bit about that, and Erica was speaking about that, but you know, just getting in writing like what the police officers are doing with their time, and so we can really think about, you know, how can even dispatch like help affect like what type of person is called out. But those are like systemic things that we just have to think about, like how they can be executed, like how they can actually happen. So we did, to your point, to your first point, speak about that, and we're just trying to dig into the details a little bit more to figure out how to come up with a recommendation around it.
You can do it. I have the highest respect for you, Lane.
Angela and Lane.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not running this meeting.
Yes, you are.
We love you, Nat. We love you. I have a quick question for the budget committee. So I'm just wondering, you know, as you guys thought about different possible ways of investing, did you bring up, or was the topic of, because I think I had suggested wellness, right, and mental health, and possibly bringing up rebooting, if you will, the Pico Wellness Project, or something of that capacity that again addresses the mental health and everything within each of our communities, you know. And I know, and I'm sure Lisa could speak more on what Pico Wellness could offer in this type of environment that we're experiencing right now.
We didn't really get into it in today's discussion because we were really thinking about restoration of programs, right? And so the team that did Pico Wellbeing Project, a lot of them aren't here anymore. And so it would be a different thing. But I think one thing with this budget team that did come up in our discussions was the team that's talking about alternate responses to incidents, right? Which is going to be having a meeting on Monday with people from the Department of Mental Health. We're really clear that there's probably going to be ideas that come out of that group that will definitely be things that the budget team could see advocating for. Right. And so it's, again, one of those things where that's why I'm on all the groups, is because I can really see there's so much crossover, and, you know, all of these things are reinforcing each other. So I know it feels crazy and it's like there's too much going on, but it's all feeding in and making each area stronger, I think. And so, yeah, that's definitely on the radar, and just thinking about the best way to get at some of that stuff.
Okay, now comment on that. It also is embedded in some of what Mike had said in his earlier statements about if we are able to refund agencies, many of which for mental health, that provide services in the schools and the community. And even just when you talk about wellness, Angela, even services that are provided at PAL, at Virginia Park, through the CREST program, because that's childcare, wellness, not having to stress about things of that sort. So in some way we did, it's embedded in there. but there's a lot more in terms of how to kind of keep that mentality and that key piece embedded in there. But it was discussed in terms of considerations or options or recommendations.
Angela, to that point as well, we didn't discuss it, but I read your email, and I wasn't a resident here at the time of the whole well-being project, but I went on the website and did all the research on it. It seemed phenomenal. And so I went through the whole budget and looked through it, and I noticed that the PICO well-being project was in the capital improvement budget, not part of the general fund. And so I didn't know if that is part of our recommendations can go to the capital improvement budget as well, or if that's something that's off limits. I just don't know how those are segmented out, and if that's fair game as well for recommendation.
Now it's Lane's turn.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to jump in all places, but just as a little bit of framing, I want to go back to what Rolinda said earlier, because I think it's really important, looking both at short-term and long-term. A lot of our budget restructuring was unfortunately impacted by COVID-19, and the library is really the primary example of that. Without going into too much of the details, just as a few examples, library operates on a combination of permanent and as-needed staff. And so as-needed staff are brought on effectively as needed. That means both that there is more pressure when staff are not needed, to not be employing with taxpayer funds staff that are not working and are not expected to work for some period of time. It also means that to bring the libraries back, it's a little bit easier to bring back as needed staff when the funds are available. But also to open a library, you don't just need library staff, you also need public works staff. And for example, the HVAC is out at Ocean Park, which actually was a point of contention, because at one point we thought we could find money to reopen Ocean Park, but then we realized that we needed a couple more $100,000 to bring back the HVAC. So it's a combination right now of, can you bring people in? Can you actually provide the services? How do you provide the services? What are the new expenses that are required based on public health guidelines? And what are the needs, and how do you balance those things? So that, just going back to Rolinda's point about short-term and long-term, unfortunately in the short term, we do have to consider COVID-19. The good news about our budget that I have been talking about with city staff a lot, there has been some apprehension as people read the newspapers to say, well, the economy is looking so bad, and everybody says the economy won't be better until 2023, 2025. That is exactly what we predicted. So we think we are at our lowest level right now. And the question is, how soon do we get to build back up? Do we get funds from the federal government? There's a ballot measure in November. Does the economy build back up? So that is a question for us, is how quickly do we build back up? But one of the things I'm also encouraging city staff is, across the board, as we build back up, we know that tourism is not fully back for some period of time. International tourism, other kinds of tourism, we do not expect to immediately recover. And with that, we need to not think about going back to January 2020, but rather to think about building up slowly between now and 2025. And so as we think about that, we've been focused on economic recovery. What are the areas that help us to generate the funds that then allow us to bring other things back? And also, what are the priorities for bringing things back, and how are they possible? As we look at that, we've also been looking at collaborations. So what are the areas where we can work better with nonprofit partners, with our governmental partners? So I don't know if I'm supposed to say this publicly, but I will. For example, I have said to the superintendent, if you need Fairview, that might be a possibility, because we're not currently using that building, but we could fill it with children's books. But public health guidelines, you have to be able to staff it, and you have to be able to. So all of, more than ever, we are trying to work together as a community. So as you look at the budget, I would encourage you, as Rolinda said, to think short-term and long-term, and not to think necessarily, there may be some places where we just want to restore what we had in January 2020, but we also want to be re-envisioning how do we do things and how do we do them best to serve the community across the broader community. And the last thing, unfortunately, that I will say is, Mike, we cut the capital improvement budget before we cut anything else. So you can look at that budget, but there's no money in it. So that we took $117 million in one-time funds to fill the budget deficit. And one of the first places was scaling back our capital improvement projects for the time being until we could rebuild that. Now, the one of the other factors in doing the budget was that we have a AAA bond rating. Maintaining our AAA bond rating potentially allows us to get bond funds earlier than other cities, which means we would again have a capital improvement project. So we have projects that we ended and said we're just not going to be able to do that, and then we have projects that we said we're going to shelve it. And if bond money comes back, then it's ready to go. It's on the shelf. So capital improvement project is something you can look at. There's no money in it right now, and you can't bond a project like PICO, but that would be in the long-term set potentially, as opposed to the short term. Anyway, but again, all of that just is framing to try to help you to develop recommendations.
Any other comments or thoughts about the budget subgroup? Daryl?
Well, you spoke about restoration programs, and I wasn't privy to some of it, but the city and the community, PICO neighborhood community, came up with a PICO partnership program that was which is a very strong collaboration between the city and the neighbors, that they wanted youth in the community to have another shot at education after they got out K through 12 in Santa Monica, and everyone's aware of the achievement gap of Black and Brown students. And I wasn't a part of the creation of the program, but when I was running it, we were able to match it with a federal program, so that the students in the PICO Partnership Program, whatever they missed in high school, we were able to get them to where they needed to be, and we switched them over to Student Support Services Program, and we got a lot of our students matriculating out to four-year institutions, which would not have happened if the community, if the city had not been conscientious and listened to the community. But one of the challenges is when they changed some of the directions of PICO Partnership Program, a PICO Promise, it was out consultation with the community. Now, I had retired by then. But those are the kinds of things that the city needs to be aware of when they look at restoring programs and look at programs, and look and listen to the needs of the community, because that afforded a lot of students to go on campus tours, and from Santa Monica that would have never done it. And they went on to be lawyers, whatever they wanted to be. So, and that was in the early 70s. No. It was, I took over somewhere in 99, 2000 that that program was created. But again, I came along in 75. But it was just a great program. The city funded it. They couldn't understand why they couldn't go right into the federal program, but we're able to explain to the city, you couldn't go in the federal program until you're ready. PICO Partnership was a great program, because by the time they got to the federal student service program, they shot off like rockets. So if you're looking at restoration of programs, and with the achievement gap at the Santa Monica Unified, that may be something you may want to put back on the table.
Wally?
Yeah, Lane, I've got a question specific about the budget. Can the general public volunteer their own time and their own effort to fill slots, say in the library system, when it's appropriate to quote unquote staff the systems, thus saving dollars for the city? Or does this fly in the face of the city union employment policies?
It's an interesting question, Wally, and it's one that we have been looking at pretty carefully. There are a couple of issues. One is just vetting of volunteers. Volunteering in 2020, we have to be much more careful from a public safety perspective than we ever did before. So volunteers, it's a question we were asked with respect to the Playground Access Program, which is a very popular program with kids. Can we just run it with volunteers? And the answer is effectively only if you have regular background checks and all sorts of other procedures in place that essentially make it not viable. And I see Shuli shaking her head. In terms of, yeah, it's funny you say it, because we have leadership labs in the city, and it is a topic that I actually specifically proposed today that we might do a leadership team lab on, is where are the areas where actually bringing in volunteers doesn't fly in the face of bargaining group agreements and is time effective. So as many of you know from working in nonprofits, volunteers can take more time than they give. But for example, we ran a food distribution event today with city staff volunteering, and it was, all people stepping in, and our Virginia Avenue food pantry and our farmers markets do use volunteers. So I think it is something we can look at. We can't replace employees, but there may be areas. It's the right, to my point earlier, that we want to be looking at how can the community provide what the community needs, and what is the city's role in it. Looking at volunteers is definitely part of that equation.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I also brought it up a meeting or two ago, Nat, you had said what was so meaningful was when people engage with actual city employees, in the case of police, or it could be any other department, and they have skin in the game. They've got, that they feel that they're part of it and that they can contribute and not be a bystander. And I think, it all goes to what the quote that one of the persons on the group had put up from Cheryl Richardson that really spoke to me as well, is that people start to heal the moment they feel heard, and being heard is being part of the group. So if there was a way that we could, or people could say, great, I'll go get the background checks and do all those things that the city wants, and next month I'll be ready if I get the call. I believe in, city use. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Did I see another hand before
Yeah,
we go?
Nat, I raised my hand.
Go ahead, Nat.
Wally, when you mentioned that, one of our programs, and I don't think we have it today, and Erica and Darnell can tell me quickly, the reserve police officers, do you have any on your department?
No, Nat, we haven't had reserves for a while now.
For 100 years, probably. Yeah. Anyway, these are opportunities where not only do you have people from the community volunteering, they have to go through certain training and to be able to ride around in the car and have credentials saying that they're in fact reserves. But take away the police and say other things. If you have a model that allows community to involve themselves with the public agency. Now, what I hear our city manager saying, and I totally 100% agree with her, a lot of our dreams and aspirations in this group are hampered by COVID-19. In other words, there's things that we'd like to do we cannot do. But I'm also a person who believes in creating plans and procedures that allow me to move on in the future when things get better. Or it's like you having a life insurance policy or something of that nature, or however you keep yourselves together when times are rough. And so my point is, keep thinking about good ideas, but realize in reality, some of these things can't happen because there are no funds to do it. And we are under COVID-19, like the city manager explained about all the things we have to do to get a volunteer. All the time you have to check background, all this stuff, health and all of this, PPEs and that kind of stuff. So I'm listening, but I'm also cautious.
Yeah, I think that's why people are starting to really focus in on short-term, medium-term, long-term recommendations, right? Because we're in a completely different city than we were in 6 months ago, but we might also be in a completely different city, knocking all the wood in my house 6 months from now, right? That maybe something will have shifted and things will look better for the city. And we're also seeing sort of an uptick in philanthropic interest in supporting the city. So who knows what we'll be able to do, but I think it makes sense for this group to be thinking about the really incremental, right? The what would it be like if we could get a little bit back, and then the swinging for the fences, who do we really want to be, you know, at the end of all this, and the end of all this not being in 3 weeks, but being in, you know, years from now, right? What changes do we really want to see? I saw hands and then my computer's covering it up. Was that Erica?
Sorry, I just wanted to give a really quick shout out to the ultimate volunteers in our police department, who are the kids who are part of our Explorer program, and dedicate nights a week and weekends a year just to come out and help out with our police operation, and also the officers that volunteer their time in order to be able to bring those kids up and help out and get them involved in the community. And I didn't want just the reserve conversation to hide what they do give to our department, which is really pretty fantastic.
I can't resist. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, on that note, I would love to just see more things like that where kids and other community members can just kind of connect with officers. I know some of that's been going on through the diversion program and PAL and lots of places, but I don't know that there's funding for that in the budget, aside from maybe, I don't know if PAL gets funding directly out of the police department budget. I can't remember. But funding more things like that, and funding, you know, things like restorative justice circles for when harm is caused, even if it's not intentional. Harm is harm, and having that opportunity to repair and heal and come together and relate as humans, I think is really very powerful. So I would, even if it's not like restoring to what we used to have before, maybe that's part of reimagining what we could have. I've been parts of those kinds of things, you know, through the district or through diversion, and I think it's just it's where the heart of this work really is.
On that same page, I can't resist adding also, because I know we have Robbie on the committee, and Lisa has been working with our internal staff efforts around race equity. And I do think in all of these areas, mentoring is a really powerful, and you know, it's not something that requires a huge program. I also have encouraged staff, everything doesn't need to be, as some of our council members would say, gold plated. You know, you don't have to produce a glossy brochure for everything you do. And one of the things we're really looking at internally is how do we mentor staff of color and really bring them up through the organization to make sure that our stars are staying with us and that we're deploying the entire organization to do that. I think that's something you can do in this committee. And I also think it's something that I would love to see as we look to build up Black-owned and minority-owned businesses in Santa Monica. For example, we have Govind Armstrong, who is you know, one of the region's best Black chefs at the Lobster. If I could get, you know, Govind to work together with you know, a Black entrepreneur who wants to open a restaurant, that's going to be more powerful than anything else. Not more powerful, but it certainly can be part of the package across the board if done well.
Angela.
I think this kind of segues into what some of the ideas we were talking about. We had started to jot down for community engagement, right? And looking at these this restorative justice and having these courageous, what we'll call them now, courageous conversations between the community and the police, and being able to work through a lot of these issues that occur. And then also at the same time too, you know, I know we had listed, like, say, for example, creating more involvement as you look at, I mean, I think the Explorers is great, and I think PAL is great, but again, we still have a core group of kids who don't participate in either activity. So it's getting those kids to become more involved. And maybe that's a softball game or a basketball game or, you know, flag football. It's like creating these synergies, creating these opportunity for our youth, our young adults, and then families again to work with the police and work on different ways of getting to know each other and getting to know the community, whether that's we have our community night, you know, once a week or once a month where everybody gets together. And again, creating all of these opportunities, because at the end of the day, what does it do? It helps improve police culture among everything else.
Daryl, were you going to say something?
No, I think the volunteer is a good idea. We haven't had to do it as an organization in Santa Monica, but we talked a little bit last time about having some programs like in Oregon where people come in and help de-escalate situations, and I think we've done in LA. Now, why we get called, because they have an LA branch and they have a San Fernando branch, but some of these families will call us, especially if there's a crisis, and they don't want anyone to get shot. So we'll call the police department and say we'll be on scene, and they come. And sometimes it takes 7 hours to de-escalate it, and we're volunteering, but it takes a while. So there may be some value there in terms of, we haven't had that particular issue in Santa Monica, and they use St. John's, but there's some things that I guess you can do as volunteers, have people train. Fortunately, a lot of our branch members have been in alcohol rehab, counselors, run drug programs. I mean, where they have the skills, but if you have the volunteers that you can train, if they just can be there to help de-escalate. That was a good something they said, talked about earlier.
Angela?
I think George had mentioned creating a Department of Safety and Well-Being, and he wants to talk a little bit more about you had created that suggestion, if you want to speak more on that.
Well, it was just a brainstorm idea for now, but I think it would probably be on our longer term list. So I just like the whole concept that Santa Monica has pursued on the issue of well-being and well-being in the community, and I think we ought to be having conversations about what makes a community safe, what makes people feel safe, what makes our communities well, and I think our answers would often not start with sending a person with a weapon. And we probably start some other places. So I'd love to have that conversation over the long run.
Before I turn it to Erica, because I know she had some information she wanted to share in response to questions that we got for the police department in the early weeks. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken who wants to speak? I want to make sure everybody is heard that has anything that they want to add. Becky, Julie, I know you chimed in recently, but if anybody has anything else they wanted to add at this stage before we go on to the data discussion, just wanted to keep the floor open for another minute.
I did have one question. This is kind of going back to an earlier topic. Sometimes that's how my brain works. Think of it a little later. With the budget, I'm not on that committee, but wondering if you discussed, when I looked over the budget, I didn't see any line items for like gear, like bullets and guns and tactical stuff. Did I miss it, or did you discuss that, or is that something that's
It was actually part of
the
line item. Yeah. Go ahead, Erica.
Oh no, I was just going to say I don't have the sheet in front of me, and you may.
I don't either.
It was listed on the line item breakdown.
Okay, I think I just didn't see which one it was though. I'll take a look again.
We just kind of focused on personnel, like the meat and potatoes today.
Okay.
Well, I'm pretty sure, sorry, Lisa, but I'm pretty sure the number we've been focused on, the 98 million or whatever it is mostly not capital equipment. And I suspect the capital equipment budget is somewhere else. What I mean by that is 93 or 94% of it is personnel, of the 98 million is personnel costs, and the rest is listed as supplies, which includes a lot of miscellany, but not really things like equipment, or if you're talking about I know it's controversial, but the military style equipment, that sort of thing, that must be somewhere else, listed somewhere else.
That's kind of what I'm curious about, the costs of those kinds of things.
Yeah, we can try to provide more information about that. Large purchases would potentially be part of the capital improvement project, assets that would depreciate over time. But the everyday gear should be somewhere in the line items in the general fund budget. But we'll get somebody to help walk through that.
Okay, Erica, did you want to give a quick overview and just oh, Robbie, sorry, go ahead. You're okay?
That's okay. I was just going to reiterate what I said last week about circling back to the mentoring. and how police interact with communities is with the chief in AJ Ali's Walking While Black, how he encouraged his department, and he did it as well, walked the community and got to know the neighbors and community members so well that they were, if he was hungry, he never had to buy lunch. They were always trying to feed him and, come in, use the bathroom, whatever. I mean, it was just, I know this is COVID time, so people can't do that now, but I just thought it was so wonderful how he interacted with the community, and he, not only him, but his staff and the other officers, and that's how they got to know the community. And they did play baseball in the street even sometimes. I know we can't do that here, and we've got plenty of parks. So there's a lot that can be done in regards to mentoring and policing and getting to know the community. And next week, maybe we'll talk about the ACAP.
Shuli, I just want to say the ammo, were you talking about ammo and shooting supplies? That type of thing?
I guess not so, and I don't know the ins and outs of this. I'm asking from a very ignorant place. Not so much like the day-to-day stuff that police officers normally have, but like things that I read about like the militarization of police. I don't even know really what that means, but I know there's a critique out there that like police have so much gear and tanks and so. I know it's not a tank; it's called something else, but that more like that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. So we
I don't even know if we have that in Santa Monica.
No, well, we just spoke like I don't know who mentioned it, but the 91 million that was like salaries and personnel out of like the total 98 or 99. So
I'm sure Erica or Darnell could help me understand this better.
Yeah, and we have that line item budget too. I don't know if it was sent out to the whole group, but
Julie, I just forwarded it to you. I can send it to the whole group.
Thank you.
If I can just quickly piggyback on what Robbie said about, building community, I feel like a lot of that's also going to be echoed in the community engagement conversations we're about to embark on. What communities would like to see, what lacks, what can be improved upon, and have honest conversations that could be bridged back into this group to ensure that when we're talking about in the different committees in terms of reimagining or what things might look like differently, how to ensure that gets included. Because again, that's part of like what I shared as far as the quote in terms of people being heard and beginning to build relationship where perhaps there was trauma. And so how do we do that in a very sensitive, intentional way? And so I think I'm looking forward to having those community engagement sessions to really bridge that in as well. So I think, again, it's something I think that will always be present in terms of in the different committees that are moving forward.
All right, Erica, over to you.
So I'm actually going to throw this out to the group because I know that it's getting late. I have quite a few bits of data. We can go through them quickly, or we can wait until next week. It's mostly a breakdown of how we spend our time, which unfortunately doesn't get to the granular level that I think that New York Times article did, but it's what we can do given the way that we track those things. And then also talking about that the shocking number that's been sent around both during the public comment and then also with Michelle Wittig about the 30% of our arrests of African Americans. And so I have some things to talk about with those two things, but I don't want to put it in at the end if everybody's kind of getting tired. We can wait till next week or go through it briefly, just depending on where the group's at right now.
I'd like to hear it, but
I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear it because I go ahead.
Okay.
I mean, especially with respect to Michelle's report.
Yeah. Can we hear it and see it? I mean, can we go over it and then can send it? Lisa can send in the email. So
yes. And there will be a lot more sent to you than what we actually go over. I'm going to skip through some of the things because it's just kind of repetitive, but I'll try and get to the basic part in the discussion, and then you can look at it and ask questions later. So cool. Okay, great. So do we have slides or?
Do you want me to open one of the files? I can share my screen.
Can you? Because I actually have no ability to do that. So
which one would you like? Which one? Would you
let's start with the calls for service by source. It's the PowerPoint presentation. So there's four slides.
It's a map?
No, it's actually 4 slides. The first one looks like this, calls for service. It's like a 4-slide presentation.
So, sorry, everybody.
I'm okay with you just talking through it.
Here you go.
Well, I can actually start while Lisa's looking for that particular presentation. So the question was how police officers spend our time. And again, we don't track our calls the same way that other departments have. So this is a breakdown of our calendar year 2019. We had 123,481 different calls for service that our department went on. So it's a really large number. We are very busy, especially for a city our size. That's a lot going on in 8.3 square miles. And when you see the heat map later, you'll understand just how much business that is. So a lot of work going on. We split up our work basically in 2 basic categories. It's very simple. There's officer initiated activity, which is things like pedestrian stops and vehicle stops. And then anything that a crime in progress that an officer happens to be there. So it's something that's initiated by the officer and that basically starts when an officer tells dispatch that they're on that kind of activity. So that's 31% of the work that we're doing. The other 69%, as you can see, is citizen initiated. So these are calls that come into our police department through one of 2 ways, either through 911 as a life-threatening emergency, or through our non-emergency phone number. And the non-emergency phone number, it goes to the same dispatchers. It just doesn't get prioritized to be answered the way that a 911 call would. So 70% of our calls basically are coming in from the community, and we don't have any real control over that as far as what's coming in. I would say probably the paperwork that goes with each of these kind of is about the same. So the amount of follow-up that we're doing is about 70%, and then 30% follow-up on the officer initiated. So unless somebody's on a lunch break, they're pretty much doing one of these 2 things. All right, next one, please. As you can see, the top 25 call types. So these are, if we can, squeeze it over a little bit. You can see what the most the most calls that we're doing are these pedestrian stops and vehicle stops, and those are all of our self-initiated activity. And then you can see the different calls for service, basically. Periodic checks are also self-initiated activity. So those are the top 3. This is actually a 6-page listing if you were to go through all the different call types, but at the end of the day, they end up being like 1% or 0% of our total calls for service. But again, you can see the total number of incidents is 123,000 across all of these different things. All right, next one.
Hello.
So if we can go up into the upper left-hand corner there, possibly. So a lot of the questions that we get are about traffic and vehicle stops. So again, this is self-initiated activity. Officer sees a traffic violation and they're going to do a stop. The vast majority of the time, those are advisals. 62% of the time, 24% of them turn into citations, 4% are field interviews, and then 4% are arrests. Other, I'm not really, they're just not categorized. I don't know exactly what that is, but again, the vast majority of them are advisals. And then the bottom part is our other self-initiated activities. So those are pedestrian stops. And you can see the majority of those pedestrian stops are handled by police officers, 81%. The 19% of non-sworn are mostly animal control, and then our park rangers who are out doing pedestrian stops, mostly to do advisals. Next one. And this is a breakdown of the citations that we write. The next slide that I'm going to show you is arrests, and that'll be the last one for tonight. But just as far as the citations are concerned, we are able to break out the data by residents. So we look through just the zip codes, so 90401 to 90405, Santa Monica residents. The zip code resident not listed, those 22, the vast majority of them were foreign tourists who don't have a zip code. And then you can see the non-Santa Monica residents. So of the number of individuals, let's go by the number of citations. Some individuals get more than one citation, which is why the number of citations is actually larger than the number of individuals cited, because we've cited people more than once. But you'll see that of Santa Monica residents, 19% of the citations that we wrote were to Santa Monica residents, and 81% were to non-Santa Monica residents. And if we can just open up the arrests for 2019.
Yep.
So this is the part that Michelle sent out her breakdown of statistics, and I wanted to write them down. So she cited the 2020 census, 4.4% of Santa Monica residents in the 2020 census identified as African American. And then she said that they were 28 to 29% of arrests were African American, and 14 to 15% of the citations. And so I tried to figure out where that 30% number was coming from. And so I was doing a little of my high school math today. And if you looking at this whole page, and it goes down a lot further, you can see the total number of arrests was 3,800. And if you go through this, and again, you'll be getting this, so you can take a look at it and do a little number crunching on your own. If you add up all of the arrests for African American under each of the categories, non-homeless, homeless, non-residents, non-homeless and homeless, zip code not listed, and non-homeless and homeless residents, and you add up all of those numbers, it ends up being 1,001. Oh no, yeah. It is, sorry. Yeah, 1,133 out of 3,840, which is 30%. So, but I wanted to break out for you the homeless versus non-homeless, and it's mostly to make a point about how there's larger forces at play when it comes to statistics. Is if you count up the homeless arrests that we make for African Americans in all three categories, resident, zip code not listed, and non-resident, that's actually 842 of the 1,133 were African Americans, or people who identified as African American. So that's a full 74% of those arrests were for homeless related issues. So I wanted to put that in context because I don't know if any of you are familiar with the really, really significant impact of homelessness and the racial disparities, but in both in California and it's reflected in LA County, it's only like African Americans make up 13% of that population in the county and 6.5% in the state, but they are actually 40% of our homeless, both in LA County and in the state. And what we're talking about here is really a much larger societal problem that's just sifting out in our data, and it's something that we're aware of, and it's something that we want to try to change. A lot of that has to do with just the fact that those are the people that are being cited for homeless violations, and it's something I think I'm really hoping that when we start talking about how we can change both our community culture and also our police culture, that we can look at how the enforcement that the community is asking us to do, because I think if you ask any Santa Monica resident what their top 3 issues are, in Santa Monica, one of them will always be homelessness, that we need to rethink how it is that we think about homelessness and whether or not that is going to be a law enforcement problem. So again, you're going to be getting a lot more information in your inbox. There's plenty of opportunities that we can talk about it and maybe try and think of ways that we can make those numbers shift. But I did want to give you that information, and I wanted to thank our folks in crime analysis for putting it all together, including the heat maps that you'll be able to see. So again, I appreciate your time tonight, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
There's too many hands. I saw Mike, Nat. We'll start with Mike.
So you mentioned at the very beginning, you were saying that we don't track, you said we don't track our calls in the way other departments have. What are we supposed to make of that comment? In what ways do you not track in the same ways that others have?
Well, again, I'm not even sure how the departments that were in, this is an article that that Mr. Brown sent out. I'm not sure exactly how they were figuring out exactly how they can break out their time like that. It's just, when we look at our database, and these are private products that are sold to police departments because to handle data, that the way that we track our data is aligned with how we need to report it out to the federal government and also to the state and to the county. But it's not something where we could, I could eyeball how much time I personally spend each day doing certain things, but it wouldn't really track across police officers in our department because we all have different roles. So I don't know how they came up with those numbers. The only way that we could think to be able to set apart our workload was to look at the self-initiated and citizen-initiated.
My question is quick. If you remove all homeless, in other words, we reimagined or imaged, as some people say, the police department, and we had a crew of people, not police officers, taking care of the homeless situation, what impact would that have on the reports that Michelle made?
So if we just looking at the residents of Santa Monica who are non-homeless, we made 67 arrests in 2019, which was 2% of our arrests were of African-American housed residents in Santa Monica.
Yeah, that goes back to my, it goes back to my earlier question. We should be agreeable to standards, whatever those standards are. So when you have a chance to talk with Michelle, find out what her standards were, getting her data, and what your standards are getting your data, so we'll not be apples and oranges, but apples, okay?
Angela, Robbie, Daryl, and potentially Shuli. I can't tell. She might just be scratching her eyebrow.
Thank you. So I just had a question regarding what are the types of, for the homelessness, what exactly are they being arrested or cited for? Like, what are some of the things,
So the top couple of citations that we write to homeless people are camping, trespassing. Oh boy, now I'm blanking. I should know this because we just figured this out. But it's a mixture of municipal code violations and park closure is another big one. So I would say those are the top 3 that we're citing for, and they're generally not things that you're going to find housed residents. They're not camping. They're generally not in our parks after closure, although there is, they have the equal opportunity, but it just doesn't generally happen. And then the trespassing part.
So then we're citing them, but we know they can't pay, right? I mean, if we're giving them tickets and things like that. So I'm just wondering I mean, it's like a vicious cycle here, right? You cite them, they leave, they come back. you know.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of people who are housed that can't afford citations. I mean, like that's not always solely in the realm of homelessness, but we do have alternate, we have diversion programs, and we also have homeless community court and other ways that they can, you know, do community service and things like that, to just like anybody. I mean, they have the same options as far as taking care of tickets if they don't have the financial resources. But I will tell you, it's much more destructive when you have less. I mean, you know, it's sad, and it's something that we absolutely need to be talking about as a community, for sure.
Robbie?
So I guess I did have a question for Erica, but I'm gonna hold that. I want to ask Lane. Maybe this is a question for Lane. I don't know. Maybe it's definitely a question for some of these committees to be answering. We had what we considered, or what we were parading around as one of the best groups of people that were addressing our homeless situation. So we know with the COVID, it only got worse. Homelessness only got worse. So what I'm trying to figure out is, I mean, I'm sure there's some admin, analysts, other positions that probably didn't get hit with the cuts. Could we have done something differently and kept our homeless staff intact? Or were they not as effective as we were going around telling various communities? And the other question that I have, that was one, is I know in the Valley and in Hollywood and a lot of other areas are taking their homeless off the street and putting them in hotels. I know we have some of the finest hotels, but maybe we, you know, have some that aren't so great or whatever. I don't know how we would do that, but why aren't we taking our homeless and putting them into hotels? And we even have the capacity to almost do like a wraparound service. I mean, we could service them with everything while they're at the hotel. They're in a room. You can give them shelter. You can give them food. You can give them everything they need, and they are stationed. You know, they're in the hotel or in that area. So I'm trying to figure out what other cities are doing that about the homeless, but we're not. And then we got rid of one of the most valuable teams that we say we had, which was the homeless team, and I don't get it.
Yeah, Robbie, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate Erica ending our evening on the easiest questions in city government. You guys signed up for the easy committee. So a couple of thoughts here. First of all, we didn't eliminate our homeless team. We did eliminate the senior advisor on homelessness. She was a limited term employee. So she was on contract for a limited term, and I believe was due to expire 1 year later. Her role was largely a coordinating role. But I do want to be clear, we didn't eliminate the underlying teams, which are largely in the police department and in community services in our Homeland, in our Human Services division. So, but we did eliminate that position in the city manager's office, which was a coordinating position. The hotel question, we did fund 40 rooms at the Palms Motel and are continuing to. And Erica, you may have more recent information than I do on that, but that program, we used a Cedars-Sinai grant. So we have done that. We tried to work with the county to find even more rooms. We were working with, I think, the Bayside, and the county declined that facility for other reasons early on, but we then used our Cedars-Sinai grant to move forward with the Palms Motel, and are continuing to be in contact with the county about how we can run those kinds of programs. It is true that most of our hotels are more expensive than the county and the state funding want to use. It doesn't make a ton of sense. And we are part of a regional hub, obviously. And so So that's part of what LASA and the county look at there, but we did use that program for Palms Motel and are continuing to. The other person, Lisa, just a note, if you can, if we can remember, we should get Nicole Gujas, who is our city attorney's office criminal division chief, to come and talk with you as well, because she works with the Human Services Division on the homeless court diversion program. Quite honestly, when looking at Shuli and Liz, when I was the city attorney, I actually wanted to run a volunteer mental health diversion program and see if we could get some of our extremely talented mental health professionals to lend their time to essentially something that would be a one-time life skills or something else program, as opposed to a sustained program for lower level violations. That, like all volunteer programs, is more complicated than it sounds when you just dream it up in your office. But it was a kernel of an idea that we were throwing about. Nicole came from LA City and led a bunch of their data and diversion programs. So she joined the city attorney's office as the chief in 2018. So we should get her in front of you. But I think, there's no question that Erica has hit on one of the both most immediate issues that we face as a local government, and one of the areas where public safety reform is, as Angela pointed out, these questions of cycle. Do we, are we resolving homelessness? Are we creating homelessness? Are we perpetuating homelessness? Are we ending homelessness? Is a question that we have to ask in every aspect of what we do. We do know that the answer is housing. And one of the things we're very focused on right now, and LA County has always had a housing first model, as do we, but one of the things we're really focused on right now is our Preserving Our Diversity program and other programs, and looking at the potential, the looming eviction crisis nationwide, and how, given funding gaps that we have, how we're going to keep people in their homes. We have an emergency order through September 30th, but then, at the end of the day, people will need money to pay landlords. And that is a huge pressure. We need the federal government. This is my call your federal friends. We need the federal government to come through with funding directly to our tenants, because we don't necessarily, we don't have the funding right now to just pay to keep everyone in their homes. And while we do have anti-eviction policies in place. But lots of extremely important questions in there.
Okay, Daryl.
I just want to thank you, Erica. You made me not sound so crazy to my small committee. I was speaking to the fact that more African Americans are non-resident in the city, or make up the majority of some of the concerns we have. When I was an alcohol rehab counselor in '73, when I first got to school, college, the majority of homeless and those with substance abuse, alcoholism, and Skid Row were white males. If you go down to Skid Row today, is a whole African American community, men, women, children, babies. And to that end, we've been involved with concerns of arrest in Santa Monica. Sometimes, I'll give you one example. At the McDonald's on 2nd Street, the homeless kind of congregate behind that little, Erica, you know where that little stuff is behind there. And sometimes they get issues with the security personnel. So it gets conflictual then when police are called in. Someone has to be arrested, and then the folks that have mental health issues or whatever, they are the ones that are arrested. In a couple of cases, we found that in that one case, we found McDonald's was completely in the wrong. Unfortunately, the person had some mental issues, and we couldn't bring them together to sue them to help put them in a nice placement. So when you're talking about this population, you put them in facilities, a lot of times they will not stay in a facility. And that's one of a major problem of addressing the homeless issue. So, but I appreciate those numbers because we have a van system that looks at that data too, but yours is more specific to Santa Monica. So I really appreciate that. It gives us something to go back and look at, because those are the kind of situations that, at least in Santa Monica, in terms of that homeless and mental health issues that we've been involved with Santa Monica PD. So I appreciate that. It helps.
So Angela, just to lighten you up there some, what happens is you can't get the fancy hotels to actually donate rooms. Okay, I know this because with my human trafficking, Motel 6, we actually busted 503 of them for trafficking. Guess who was the first people to step up to volunteer the rooms? Motel 6. So look at the motels. Then a lot of your homeless people are mentally unbalanced. And you can try to put them in there, but they won't go. So you've got to look at both parts. How you've got to look at the mental part first and see how balanced they are. If they want to go, they'll go. If not, if they're fighting you on it, leave it alone. That's what we've done.
Robbie?
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate that, Becky. I think and Daryl, I was saying, I'm just trying to figure out other methods for Santa Monica that I see other cities doing. I realize if people have a mental health situation, a lot of homeless people have been professors at universities and have lost their mental capacity. And so, that's another situation. But, I know that everybody, eventually, if you stay on the street 5 or 6 years, you're going to become mentally incapacitated. That'll drive anybody. So I'm just saying, what are we doing when we have people sitting at desks, putting their feet under desks comfortably, and we have people with children, women with children in the street that we could possibly, that haven't lost their mental capacity, that their children are straight A students at Santa Monica High School and other schools, but they are about to become homeless or are homeless, and we can't provide any space for them. And we've got all these beautiful hotels and motels and whatever we have that we had fixed up for tourism. I mean, it's just not making sense to me. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Liz and then Angela.
As you're speaking, Robbie, it's also making me think of our undocumented families and how that also is relevant, and in terms of not only mental health, surviving, and even more so limited programs, because there's programs for homeless families and individuals, but not so much support in our city for the undocumented, and also their experiences with engaging or not engaging with police because of fear. And granted, I know in the past, Chief Seabrooks in the past had made statements in terms of not working with ICE, but I think there's also another population in terms of inclusivity to also keep in mind as far as the relationship between police and the undocumented, because oftentimes they won't report a situation, a trauma, anything of that sort for fear and what the repercussions of getting deported, of getting their kids removed. So there's just a lot that, as you're sharing, it just also made me think of also bringing them and lifting them up in this conversation, because their needs are just as important as the ones that we're talking about right now. And also, in terms of the data that Erica shared, thank you, Erica. Also, I'm wondering the youth. I mean, I know we have the juvenile diversion program, but how many youth are not eligible for that program, and what kind of offenses and what's the demographic breakdown for the youth in our city? Are they, local youth, or are they, because again, tourism is here in our city. So what's that breakdown as well? And then sort of since the inception of the diversion program, the changes and its effect, and maybe looking at expanding that as part of our work, as a collective work, in terms of moving forward and being inclusive of having youth be at the forefront.
Thank you, Liz. Angela, did you have another comment?
I did. Kind of, it's two-part. first of all, to circle back to what we were talking about as far as teams, and I think maybe this is one of those situations where we definitely need to put more resources toward a mental health team. I know in Culver City, they are out there in the streets, and I know they're here too, but it seems like I actually have a friend who is on the mental health team in Culver City, and I know they go from car to car. They're under the overpass over there, you know, off of Palms and Venice, and they're questioning people, and they have this whole system where they do the room key, but at the same time too, they make sure they get all of their needs met, whether it's mental health, you know, food insecurity. They make sure everything is listed. They have a whole system that they go through, and that sounds like that is something that we definitely need to put more resources into, as far as getting that mental health team on the streets. And then to also piggyback on what Liz says, I am really concerned about our youth, and especially our foster youth that have aged out of the system, because I guarantee you there's a number of those youth that are on our streets, right? Because I see them, and again, they need that support. They need that support because we know they have no one, absolutely no one, because they've aged out of the foster care system. So we know we have that number on the street, and we know that that number also has children. So again, that's that whole cycle right there in that one core group population. So again, these are other things that we really should look at. What is, and I'd be interested if you have those number, Erica, or I think it's Satara who might have the number regarding our youth and what those numbers are potentially of the ones that have aged out of the system and that are tracking to age out, and what's the result? Where are they? You know, because obviously we're losing some. So I'd really like to look into that as well.
Yeah, next week, we can look forward to getting a lot of information from the Community Services Department. Oh, who's having a great time? I have been making sure to follow up and make sure that people are tracking all the questions that we asked from the beginning. We're still getting the answers to those questions, and Community Services said that they'll have a pretty robust response for a lot of those questions, including the foster question next week. And then, of course, we'll have the police department discussion as well with representatives of Santa Monica Police Department. And I give it to Elaine for closing comments, unless anyone has anything else.
Right. I would add to that list, Erica, I don't know if you've already provided information on the hamster and C3 teams and help, but maybe Lisa and Erica somehow combined, we can provide that information on the teams that we have and the way that people work together across homelessness in particular. Last comments from me are the Chief Renaud would also like to be with you next week. I know that you have a number of questions and we have specific people answering those questions, but she would like to attend as well. So if there's specific things that you want the chief to address, you can raise those with Lisa, but most of all, she just wanted to be with you and check in and talk with you all. So she'll be with us next week. And then last thing from me is just to say thank you. I want you to know how much I appreciate the time that you're spending, the dedication to the community. This is a process that I really believe in, and I want to thank all of you for proving that that this is a great process. So thank you for the dedication and care that you're putting into it, and just for showing that engaging our community members really is one of the best ways to look at policy and proposals and to figure out not just what's in newspapers here or there, but really what makes sense for our community and for who we are, and where the places are that we need work, and where the places are that we see opportunities in proposals from other places, or just that when you look for with fresh eyes, some of the things you say are things we have thought of, and but you're looking at them with very different eyes than staff does. And that's just a really important part of this process and some of the things we've never heard before. So I just really appreciate being able to be engaged in a process that really is about what makes sense for us as Santa Monica and what makes sense for us as a community and for our residents. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Darnell and Erica and everything that they're putting into it. And I particularly want to thank Lisa, who I know is working around the clock with all of you. I told her I was planning to spend tons and tons of time, but she is running with it and doing it so well that I just am really, really grateful to Lisa for everything she's doing. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for spending the time. I know how valuable your time is. Like me, many of you are probably rushing to bedtime, so that will be the last for me. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, all.
Thanks.